Hi, this is Rob Green. In this short lecture, I'll give you the lowdown on sitemaps and wireframes, two critical components of effective digital design. Perhaps you've not heard of sitemapping before, so a big question is, why is it important? The same goes for wireframing. Why is it worth your time to learn how to do sketched wireframes, especially if you're not an artist? We'll answer both of these questions in this lecture. First, let's talk about the sitemap. Here's what a really basic visual sitemap looks like for a site that offers products and services. We don't want to confuse this kind of sitemap with another common type of sitemap, which is an XML sitemap. This is the kind of sitemap that's generated after you finish your website. You send this to the search engines to help their spiders like the Googlebot crawl and index your site pages. So we want to avoid confusing the two terms, both being called sitemaps. Before we actually start coding out a website or web app, we create a sitemap like this to make sure that the content is where we expect our users to see it. Not where our clients expect to see it or where we expect to see it, but where our users expect to see it. Actual users. Sitemaps also help you to easily identify where you might be missing pages or content. For instance, does the site have a contact us or privacy policy page? If it doesn't, does it need one? Not necessarily, but a sitemap can help reveal what's missing. This guy is needed by your visual designers to create the wireframes and the visual design brief for your client's approval. And we'll talk about wireframes in a moment. But first, I want to tell you a little about card sorts, which is a great feedback tool for recommending to your client how your sitemap should be organized. You can see it here. It can be a very simple, low-budget process. Just index cards, sticky notes, and a permanent marker. To carry out a card sorting exercise, you first write the names or topics of the web pages on your existing website, like home and about us, products and services, and so on. If you're creating a brand new site, it can be helpful to instead use the topics shown on similar websites. So you have to go search what kind of site matches the sort of content that you're going to be putting on your site. If you map out 2 or 3 of these sites, you'll have a pretty comprehensive list of possible pages for your site. It's a great place to start. The next part is to have actual potential users carrying out a card sorting exercise, which can usually take between 15 minutes to a half an hour, depending on the complexity of your site. In the card sort, your participant, which could be either an individual or a group, goes through the pile of cards on a big table and lays the cards out in the order that makes most sense to them. At the same time, the participant is encouraged to speak aloud to explain their thought process. You can either record the process in order to capture their thinking, or else just take good notes. The point is, you want to understand why they ordered the site pages the way they did in order to gain insight for their thought process. There are several different methods of sorting, and there's no shortage of resources out on the web which can explain them in detail, especially open sorting and closed sorting. If you're looking to go into a career that involves user experience or UX, it's worth understanding these concepts sooner rather than later. So once your participant is finished organizing, your card sorting exercise is complete. Take a photo of the result. Something like this is fine, and just make sure all the cards are legible in your photo. And now it's time to get a different participant to lay out the cards the way that makes sense to them. You'll be surprised at the number of different ways people can sort a site, especially a complex one. There's no magic number to how many card sorts and participants you should have. The idea is to make sure that you have a good sense for the preferences of each of your audiences, which hopefully you listed out in the project definition phase. Finally, once you've completed all of your card sort exercises, you'll have to take what you learned and build your own recommended sitemap for your new website. It doesn't need to be visually flashy, it just needs to show the flow of the pages from the home page on down. This graphic is a draft sitemap I built for a website for my university a few years ago, and the layout was based on what my card sorts told me about how users expected to find content in a comic book convention website. It turned out a lot different than how I would have organized it on my own, so I'm really glad to have had that feedback from users. The end result is I was able to use or build a site that matched how users expected to see the content, not what I thought or my client thought for how the site should be organized. To create the final map for your client's approval, I recommend using a charting program like lucidchart.com or Microsoft Visio. In a pinch, you could also use Word or PowerPoint's floating text boxes. But you're a digital professional, so I hope you'll have access to actual charting programs. I'll also put in a plug for some of the online card sorting apps that have become prevalent in the market in recent years. Rather than physical index cards, they have little virtual cards that slide around on their screen. If you take this approach, you can do your card sorting exercises remotely with people anywhere. The system I use for my mapping is called lucidchart.com. If you're a student or a teacher, you can get a free license to use it. I used to be a Visio fan, but now I do all my site mapping in Lucidchart. It's totally web-based, and you can invite other people to collaborate with you on your design work. Plus, it includes a sitemap palette, which you can see on the left, for icons related to lots of common topics. When it comes to building something the client will see, I'm always happy to add a little snazzy factor. So the takeaways here are to never build your sitemap in a vacuum. Get the input of actual users. When your participants create wildly different card sorts, use your best judgment in recommending a compromise. Or if one of the participants represents a group which is a higher priority to your client, you can favor that person's recommendations. It's worth letting your client know if there are some disagreements, and the client may want to weigh in directly. Oh, and that means you'll also have to work hard to recruit participants who are reflective of your various user personas and audiences. If you cut corners here, you risk having a site which isn't organized according to your users' needs. And the last thing is, a sitemap isn't set in stone once you've created it. If you discover during your later usability testing that people are confused, you can always come back and tweak your site architecture. Don't be afraid to if it helps your users. The second half of this presentation is about wireframing, which is the process of visually determining how your site will be laid out. When sketching out wireframes, think about being quick and temporary. None of your drawings should be masterpieces. The idea is to get rough layout ideas to the client and potential users for feedback and revision, and to avoid spending time and effort on fancy mock-ups while getting basic layout approvals. Here's one example of a wireframe. This is for a homepage. You can put notes and arrows on it to call out different functions. An important feature of the first round of wireframes, often called low-fidelity wireframes, is to be as simple as possible. The designs are black and white with no graphics, images, or colors. Here's another good example. You're just trying to set out what generally should go where on a site. And where there'd be a photographic, you just put a box or with an X in it. You don't have to sketch out every page in the sitemap, but you should have a layout for all the different kinds of pages, like the home page, basic content pages, product pages, directories, etc., so your client gets a feel for the overall site design. If you Google wireframe sketches and check out the images tab, you'll see hundreds of images for wireframe inspiration. And if you're just getting into wireframes, these images can help you to develop your own personal wireframe sketching style. For a before and after, here's the initial wireframes my students did for the Rod Library website design and the resulting live website. As you can see, the wireframes allowed us to work with the client to decide what should go where, and the resulting design was pretty close to our original sketches. So tying back to the sitemaps we discussed earlier, they really go hand in hand. You need an approved sitemap so you can tell what content and pages will be needed on the site, and then you can draw wireframe sketches for the site's various kinds of pages. The sitemaps can also tell you what content and pages will be most prominent on the website, and so you'll know if you need to include space in your sketches for a big side menu or lots of tiles in the middle of your pages or things like that. Once you have a bunch of sketches that you like, you get to show them to your client. Back in the olden days of horses and wagons, you actually had to show those pages to your client like a caveman. But in modern times, you can use a web app to upload your sketches, assign hyperlinks to your sketched out buttons and links, and let your client explore your sketches almost like they were a real website. Most of these prototyping programs allow users to comment and provide feedback right on the sketch itself. With this input, you can upload a new drawing to replace a sketch, making your design truly iterative. Small improvements as necessary until you get client approval. And here's an example. The prototyping tool I use is called the Marvel app. It has all the features I need, plus it's free. You can see here how my students and I uploaded the rough drawing, which we did with a permanent marker, and we actually used Marvel app's text editing tool to fill in the button text as well. And on the left, you can see the comments and questions that stakeholders added to this page. We posted the live link to this prototype to the library's Facebook page, and we had 140 library stakeholders check out the site and leave really helpful comments. Once your wireframes are approved, your team will use them to create the actual site mockups in a graphic design program like Photoshop. That's the point when you'll nail down the site's fonts and colors, representative graphics and photos, and the measurements for the final page layouts. But that work can't happen until you have approved wireframes in hand. So that's wireframing and site mapping. But let's say you're not in web development. Should these techniques matter to you? I'd argue that the principles I described are applicable to all design professionals. Site mapping and wireframe are simply processes to take in user perspective, experience, and feedback. If you're working for a client in any capacity or trying to meet the needs of customers, you need a way to efficiently and accurately capture their perspectives and preferences. You can creatively adapt site mapping and wireframing to your situation. The big takeaway is to always think through and get approval for your work before you begin expensive coding or programming. Simple tools like hand drawing are a great way to accomplish that. Also, the other bit of wisdom here is to appreciate iterative design, which means being willing to go back and revisit your earlier work and to be comfortable making changes in response to user feedback. Try to never get yourself locked into having to implement a bad solution. Thanks for watching. I look forward to our next lesson together.